All right, good afternoon. This is Brian Lantz here in Houston, Texas. This is the 13th of January. We're going to be discussing the countdown to President Trump's State of the Union address on January 30th. That's where we're going to be going in terms of this discussion this afternoon. But there's a lot to cover, a lot to bring forth here very rapidly. And I'm just going to jump in. First of all, of course, we have the continuation of the fake news. You want to put that up, Mike? Yeah. So this is just a cover from Newsweek, but it's just apropos of what's been going on. It's absurd. Without the label fake news, this was a recent cover of Newsweek magazine. Putin is preparing for World War III. I mean, this is, over the top. Hysteria out there, laughable. So many people weren't taking it serious, at least in Washington, D.C. And now more recently, we have the continuation of this fake news with the Senator Durbin versus President Trump, did he or didn't he, in terms of remarks made at the White House in a closed-door meeting. And we have Dick Durbin, the senator from Illinois, holding forth on supposed language that President Trump used in this closed meeting, and of course President Trump has denied it. If you think about this, and LaRouche has out a statement, a very effective statement called Trump versus Durbin. Who is the real hypocrite fostering institutional racism? Why is this happening now? That's where the real emphasis should be, which goes through this summarily. Senator Durbin, along with really the majority of both houses of the Congress in both parties, have over the recent decades been responsible for supporting policies of depopulation in the nations of Africa, but also in Haiti. The Obama administration, Obama himself personally turned his back on Haiti. When we urged, but also members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff urged, a massive relief effort, but beyond that, rebuilding effort for Haiti after the earthquake, and some years ago now. And President Obama said no, and that was left essentially to private foundations, private agencies, and so forth, which resulted in horrendous death and a continuing disaster on Haiti up to this day. What was behind this? I'll just take one example. Standing policy since the 1970s. National Security Studies Memorandum 200, authored by Henry Kissinger, signed it as a presidential memorandum authorized under President Ford, which stated that Africa and the growing population, specifically of Africa, was a threat to the national security of the United States in the advanced sector. That growing population of Africa was consuming the resources upon which the zero growth post-industrial economy of Europe and the United States needed to depend on in the future. And therefore, this problem of overpopulation had to be dealt with, and we've seen it being dealt with up until recently, when we've had a sea change in that policy, a sea change that's come from China. So again, Dick Durbin, Senator Durbin, others like him, really this shoe belongs on their foot, the feet, in terms of responsibility, in terms of what has actually been the policies that have turned many nations into almost hellholes, and which we now have an opportunity to reverse with President Trump. Let me just mention, and a couple of other elements to this. We believe that in the course of the next several days, at most weeks, the American people are going to have laid out before them the breadth and depth of this conspiracy that's been attempting a coup against the President of the United States and against the Constitution of the United States. In the course of the last few weeks, there's been an ongoing battle. Court decisions have been reached. The House Intelligence Committee in particular has received documents that have, from the Department of Justice and FBI, despite the stonewalling efforts of those agencies, or at least people in those agencies. And now that's coming out. This last week on January 8th, we had a op-ed in the Wall Street Journal titled "The Dossier Rehab Campaign." This is Steele's, Christopher Steele, the MI6 agent, his dossier that's been the basis of allegations of impropriety by Trump and of collusion with Russia and so forth. Well, this is all falling apart. The fact that this document was funded by the Clinton campaign and by the Democratic National Committee, utilizing a retired former MI6 agent who headed the Russia desk for British intelligence to cook up this piece of trash. All of this is spilling out. It has spilled out. That's the rehab campaign, the effort now to build Steele back up. Well, that's already failed as of the 13th of this month, I think. And what Kimberly Strassel in her op-ed says is that with this FBI and Department of Justice documents now becoming public, we don't know what all the content is, but we have Senators Lindsey Graham and Senator Chuck Grassley. Of course, Chuck Grassley is the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, now having made a criminal referral of Christopher Steele to the Department of Justice. That is, they're referring Christopher Steele, the former MI6 agent, to the Justice Department for prosecution for lying to the U.S. Congress. So she says, so we have that. And we have apparently more than that. What is the evidence that Grassley and Graham have seen? And she says it must be high. And she goes on. She says the risk for anti-Trumpers. Again, this is this Wall Street Journal op-ed of January 8th. The risk for anti-Trumpers, especially those doubling down on the dossier, is that the black and white documents, that is the DOJ and FBI papers that have been withheld but are now becoming public through the House Intelligence Committee, these black and white documents will blow their latest narrative to oblivion. It isn't as if there is much in the record to date to support it. If Mr. Steele was such a professional, why was he out spreading national security, quote-unquote, intelligence through the media? If Mr. Simpson, Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS, was so worried for his country, why did he spend months dodging congressional requests for testimony, and so on and so forth? So this is part of what's come to the surface. And then just very briefly, former U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C., Joseph DeGenova, went on WMAL, the largest talk show in Washington, D.C., on the 8th, and stated that it was treason what had been done to President Trump, that there were going to be criminal prosecutions, this is his judgment. Those being prosecuted would most likely be James Comey, John Brennan, who we call the most corrupt and politicalized CIA director in U.S. history, and former Obama officials, including Loretta Lynch and National Security Advisor Susan Rice. He stated that, in fact, NSA Director Mike Rogers discovered in 2016 that there was illegal surveillance being conducted under the FISA Act against Trump and circles. And when he ordered an audit of this, Clapper and Brennan attempted to get him fired. And it was Mike Rogers who warned Trump that there was surveillance of his facilities at Trump Tower, and Trump moved his campaign staff, his transition staff, to New Jersey as a result. So this is out, and there'll be a lot more. It'll not just be coming from the press, it'll be coming from the documentation. which the House Intelligence Committee in particular is now going through and assembling a fuller picture. So that cannot be ignored. I have to present that very quickly here. These are very important developments, and they're going to free up the President of the United States to do what he needs to do if we do our job. Next slide, please. You got it there, or I got it there. Okay, all right. Now, you know the gentleman on your right. You know the gentleman on your left. This is the President of France, Macron, Emmanuel Macron. He has just been in China. He's just been in China for 3 days, and this is going to have a significant effect, significantly transform Europe as a whole. And I would add, we weren't aware of it at the time, but President Trump and Macron had a lengthy phone conversation and discussion before the trip to China. And upon his return, they've had follow-on conversations since on Korea and on the New Silk Road. Now, Macron, in his trip to China, that was the 8th through the 10th of January, dramatically asserted a new policy, which he's putting forward for France, but also he's putting himself in the position of being the interlocutor of this policy between China and the rest of Europe. And so I'm going to give you some highlights of his speech in Xi'an, the former capital of China, in central China. It's where the mausoleum of the first emperor of China from the 221 BC is located, for example, the Qin dynasty. But this was his first stop, in Shanxi province. And here's some sense of what he had to say. I take these remarks as both directed to China, but also to Europe and to us. Macron stated in the speech there, for a long time, the French nation has contemplated itself in the mirror of China. A China which brought together thought, poetry, art, reflections on war, on power, on human life, as well as a world of imagination around adventures and trips of extraordinary merchandise and singular discoveries. Traveling on the Silk Road, to which you today give a new meaning and a new grammar, that is China today, and Xi Jinping, the president of China today. He continues, along with the merchandise exchange also came certain thoughts, words, customs which rapidly would take over the globe, faster than marching legions. With an intensity of a discovery that integrated our own historical patrimony. No artists, artisans, or engineers, there have been none, which have not been looked at China with fascination, at the styles and techniques. To this day, because China is a country of inventors and engineers, which is always inventing the future. So this is Macron speaking about China's role in the world today. And continuing, there is a very significant mea culpa, apology. He praises China's role in the Korean crisis and working to resolve that crisis. And that's something that's also come about over this past week, just to interject it here. As you know, North Korea is going to be joining with South Korea as a joint team at the Olympics, being held in Korea in a matter really of weeks. And President Moon of South Korea has publicly commended President Trump for his role in bringing about this rapprochement. So I just to interject that quickly. So in the speech, Macron, the president of France, praised China for its role in working to resolve this crisis. And then he had the following to say: I want to say this very clearly. I think there must be a community of views concerning how to solve these conflicts. France will not defend military solutions which will act against people's sovereignty. We must draw the lessons of past errors. Every time we tried to impose the truth or the law against the people themselves, we were wrong, and sometimes even produced worse situations. Such was Iraq or Libya today. We need to work together to develop the respect of sovereignty of the people. And then on the Silk Road, briefly here. And this is President Macron speaking in Xi'an, China, earlier this week. I am thus ready to work with the announced objectives, the programs of road, rail, airport, maritime, technology along the Silk Road, which can bring a solution to the deficit in infrastructure. Durable cities, water management, transport, the bringing together of our financial resources, public and private, for transporter projects can reinforce the connectivity between Europe and Asia and beyond the Middle East and Africa. We will do even better. And the city of Xi'an is a living example. Those first Silk Roads brought here Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity. Those roads will lead to cultural, educational exchanges and to profound transformation in the countries they are crossing today. It is a matter of giving ourselves a perspective at a moment when then shared epical stories, then speaking back to the old Silk Road, are so cruelly absent in the world today. I must say it is one of the great merits of those Silk Roads proposed by Xi Jinping. These Silk Roads reactivate the imagination of a new civilization, of fruitful exchanges, of shared wealth, and they show to all those who thought that we were in a tired, postmodern world where the great epics were forbidden, that those who decide to live great epics can make others dream as well. So these are excerpts from the speech of Macron in Xi'an, China, at the beginning of this week, and really underscore the potential that exists. And let's go on. I'll go on from here quickly. Through that, keep in mind, I think it's worth considering. Keep in mind that throughout this entire Russiagate war story, this attack on President Trump, it has not prevented President Trump from stubbornly moving forward on collaborative work with Russia, with China. We see here, this is Trump with Xi Jinping, the president of China. Very informal discussion. I think it's kind of an interesting photograph. This is the trip, the APEC summit in Vietnam, which occurred in November 6th through 10th. In the back row, you see Trump standing next to President Putin. And you had a number of discussions there at the summit between President Trump and Putin directly. So despite the Russiagate operations and so forth, President Trump has moved forward to attempt to maintain a collaborative approach, a new U.S. foreign policy, not of wars and confrontation, but of collaboration, the same that Macron is now calling for from Europe itself. And this is, for those who, this is a refresher, this is a map, one map of, that gives an idea of the extent of the Belt and Road, the new Silk Road that China is now building out in terms of high-speed rail, ports, economic development corridors, both maritime Silk Road, which is there in light blue, around India into Africa, and of course then these different routes, a total of 7 corridors across Eurasia. So now in this context, this brings us to the meeting. We're in a countdown to President Trump's State of the Union. And we've got to deal with the mess here at home. I'm not speaking of the mess that of Russiagate. That, yes, we've got to clean that up. But doing that, in the process of doing that, we've got to launch an economic recovery for the United States. We've got to bring this international cooperation home to the United States in terms of jobs, productivity, and most importantly, an ethical concept of the future. So we have released now, we've been able to release, LaRouche PAC has released this report. It's actually titled LaRouche's 4 Laws, the Physical Economic Principles for the Recovery of the United States, America's Future on the New Silk Road. And you see in the background one of these bridges being built in China. Really kind of a metaphor for this question of linking across continents. That's that same bridge looking down, so you have a full idea of what this project entails. But what we're spelling out, and we'll go through a little bit of this today briefly, is the steps that are required here in the United States. And this is the economics that President Trump needs, and he needs to learn this. He obviously has certain instincts and insight already, but this is what we have to bring forward as a policy in the United States over the coming immediate weeks. We have right now, in terms of poverty, we have 74 million people on Medicaid. We have 45 million Americans living under the poverty line. China, meanwhile, has 30 million people remaining under the poverty line, and they intend to have them lifted out of poverty over the next 3 years. In the last year, they've just announced the State Council that in the last year they've removed 13 million more people out of poverty in China. Yes, China has fewer people living in poverty today than we do. And similarly, if you take Europe, it's also lower in China than it is in Europe. So this is an extraordinary process. The United Nations has commented on this on numerous occasions. I'm just saying, to give you another viewpoint on it, that this is really, this accounts for most of the poverty alleviation in the world, is what China is doing. And what China is now doing with the Belt and Road into Central Asia and into Africa is to continue this process beyond China's border by sharing in win-win collaboration the policies of infrastructure building, education, agricultural sovereignty, and so forth that they have done themselves. 1/3 of global GDP, gross domestic product, a funny figure, but nonetheless it's what's used internationally these days. 1/3 of global GDP growth in the last year was China. So we have the need for a program here, and Helga Zepp-LaRouche of the Schiller Institute, the chairwoman of the Schiller Institute, is called on Americans and on the other side of the Atlantic, her fellow Germans and other Europeans, to launch such programs in their respective nations. If China can do this, why can't we? And that's what we're addressing with America's Future on the New Silk Road, which has already been distributed to every office in Congress. But of course, we've got to make this stick. Let me move on here. Okay. Yep. All right. Well, China's building. I'm just using a few examples. I'll try not to drown you in graphs. Some people like them, some people don't. But this is the decline of U.S. manufacturing since 1980. in terms of employment and manufacturing. And Dick Durbin and company, these are the kinds of people in the Senate railing against Trump. These are the people that supported the removal of manufacturing out of the United States into Asia, into Central America, and so forth, based on cheap labor policies, free market economics, which of course Trump is committed to reversing. And China is quite willing to collaborate in that process. Instead, let's see. Oops, I went to the end. How do I get back? Advanced technology here, you know. Okay. All right. Oh, all right. Okay. All right. This is the next slide. Sorry for the interruption. This is what's happened over the course. Now, this goes all the way from 1950 up to about 2015. But this is, you see the decline of manufacturing as a percentage of GDP this time. This is not employment. A percentage of the GDP contributed by manufacturing. And you see, on the other hand, the rise of the percentage of GDP, U.S. GDP, that comes from FIRE. That's from financials, insurance, and real estate. All right? That's what's so funny about GDP. If you say your GDP is growing, I mean, you know, is the cancer growing, or is you know, or are you growing? You know, I mean, this is what's happened to the U.S. economy, right? The implications of this in terms of what's happened to the U.S. economy. This is the decline of participation in the U.S. workforce from 1950 up to today. That is, we have a shrinking workforce. Not that we have a shrinking population, but we have a shrinking workforce. People have just given up working or looking for jobs. Well, this is this is by percentile. This is the percent of the workforce going up vertically. It's the percentage of the workforce. So at the top here is 68%. So we were over 67% around just before 2000, just before the dot-com bubble burst. I guess is one way of thinking about it. And then you have a decline down to 63%, a 5% drop in participation in the U.S. workforce. This is from the U.S. government's own statistics. All jobs, all types of jobs, productive, non-productive, FIRE jobs in terms of financials and insurance, so forth, manufacturing, the rest. This is just total participation dropping. And at the same time, we've had this extraordinary run-up of debt. This is all kinds of debt. And since 2007, U.S. corporations have doubled their debt to over $14 trillion. Since 2007, since the financial crash, total corporate debt has gone up by $7 trillion. But we also have, $1 trillion in car purchasing debt. We have 600 billion plus in student loan debt. Similar other categories you can add to that that have come along in this process. So that since 2008, we've added 14 trillion in total debt. And we've also, the Federal Reserve has also further increased indebtedness through its lending to the banks. And this is just an indication of the corporate debt going from can you read those figures? $2.5 trillion. That's 2006, 2007, and on up to where this leaves off in 2015. It was around $7 trillion. Now more. This is an interesting figure in part because obviously this is a neighbor of ours. Neighbor. This is the growth of the debt of the oil companies. The big six largest non-state integrated oil companies. This is the growth of their debt since 2010. So this is 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Right, all together, but I'm going to break out one for you here. Paul Gallagher pulled these figures together. Follow me if you can. I know, numbers get kind of, can be hard to keep all in your head at once, but very briefly here, I'll try to be succinct. In 2000, ExxonMobil, our neighbors up there in the woodlands. Exxon in 2006 reported that it had $365 billion in revenue. That was 2006. 11 years later, it has $226 billion in revenue. That's 40% less. It reported in 2006 that it had profits of $40 billion. In 2017, its profit was $7.8 billion, 85%. It reported in 2006 that it has free cash flow available to pay out to stockholders or to invest of $33.8 billion. That was 2006, $33.8 billion. In 2017, that was $6 billion. 1/6, roughly, 1/5. It said it had $6.6 billion in debt in 2006. That's what it reported. In 2017, it has $29 billion in debt, 5 times as much. Its revenue has dropped by 40%. Its profits and cash flow collapsed by more than 80%. Its debt more than quadrupled, and its stock price has gone up from $75 to $90. Now, the source of this is financial engineering. Debt that ExxonMobil has taken on has been, to a large degree, for buying back its own stock, to drive its own stock up in the market. Executives, stockholders get a higher return. The stock is going up in the market. That's what counts. This is fire, right? This is your pants on fire, right? This is speculation, and this is what's being pointed to now by financial institutions, including the International Monetary Fund and the Bank of International Settlements, as part of a bubble that's about to crash. Well, they're on January.
If I wasn't told somebody scrambled off, I got one story. I mean, you might or might not register.
Uh-huh.
50 stories like that.
Well, no, I can't say that. But we have a lot in this pamphlet, and that's what you need to read. We'll come back to that. But, and I want to just indicate. I mean, this bubble is the Wall Street Journal this week. I have it here somewhere. Yeah, here it is. January 4th. So that's a little more than a week ago, last week. Trump and Dow 25,000. The Dow went over 25,000. Now, this is interesting because the Wall Street Journal says, well, President Trump is, trumpeting, the fact that the stock market's now broken 25,000. And it's gone up 40% since election day in 2016. And what the President Trump is doing in terms of policies, deregulation, the tax agenda, that's good, and inflation is low, apparently, and so forth. However, we really encourage President Trump not to take credit for the stock market going up, because what happens when it goes down? And just a quote from this is an editorial, not an op-ed. This is the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. It still makes no sense for a president, especially one in his first year, to tee up stocks as a measure of economic success. As Wall Street legend Ace Greenberg famously put it amid the 1987 market crash, Stocks fluctuate. Next question. And that's the point, is that Trump has to get real about the economy. He's got to deal with the fire, and he's got to put the U.S. back on Hamiltonian principles very, very fast. Or this is what's going to be hung around his neck. You know, a stock market crash, chaos. This is going to. It's as it's been called the everything bubble, because you have all of these components. You have the corporate bubble, a slight uptick in interest rates. The IMF believes would result in a slight uptick, meaning 0.25% further increase in interest rates, could by itself trigger a situation in which 20% of all U.S. corporate debt is in default. 20%. So there's the corporate debt. There's homeowner debt. There's personal credit card debt that's now reaching levels of high defaulting debt. There's the debt from car purchases, all of which are being bundled and resold as mortgage-backed securities were into the speculative market. This everything bubble is what now can crash, not just mortgage-backed securities. This is what's being warned about. So what does President Trump need to do? On the one hand, he has to understand this debt problem and how it emerged. I think he has probably a pretty good idea of that. The interesting thing is that approximately, in this period in which approximately $20 trillion worth of debt has been produced in the United States, approximately the same amount of debt was created in China. Now, it's interesting, 2/3 of it was not created by the government. It's a total of concentrated in the 22 largest companies. And these are the companies that do what? Are they fire companies? Are they finances, real estate, insurance? No, these are the companies that produce steel, they produce rail, other components of infrastructure for China's economy. I mean, they're what China considers, their national security key components of their economy from a national security standpoint. And these companies have built up in China this enormous infrastructure that we know about today. This is power production, rail development, high-speed rail, airlines, energy production generally, and so forth. So what's the consequence of this? Here's just the figure. This is, there's, you can get into all kinds of mumbo jumbo on the numbers, but very briefly, if you take something called global built asset wealth, as you're comparing countries by their global asset wealth, what do they have built up in the real world? The U.S. has asset wealth. Of course, now these are GDP figures, so these are going to be real kind of funny, but nonetheless, just taking them at face value, U.S. asset wealth as of October 2015 was approximately $36.8 trillion. China's asset wealth was $47.6 trillion. China had, since the year 2000, as of 2015, invested the equivalent of $33 trillion into building asset wealth. That is rail and power, transport, cities, new cities, and so on and so forth, educational facilities, science and engineering capabilities, a space program, a science driver space program. So this has continued since 2015 and is continuing today. China's investment into infrastructure is growing at a rate of approximately 10% a year. It's growing at 10% a year. So whatever it is this year, next year is 10% more, but then the next year is 10% more than that. You get the idea. This is an expanding magnitude, growing rapidly. Well, you get further into China's and the U.S. debt, but the U.S. total debt approximately is $450 trillion. China is somewhere around $350 trillion. That's total public and private debt. But what does China have behind the debt? It has a real economy. That debt is backed up. I mean, if that debt was all wiped out tomorrow, you still would have, an integrated, growing, developing economy for the population, for the people's welfare. So what does Trump have to do today to turn the situation on a dime? And that's what we're dealing with in the pamphlet. I don't know if there's copies that can be handed out to people, but go on here. We can come back to this if people are interested in terms of a financial collapse. But, well, here briefly, let me just mention this briefly. Here you have it. In the bond, you have these curves going up and then one going down. This is the process going into 2008, summarized here. You have the collapse of physical economic activity. Well, that's what backs up your financial paper. The wealth, the paper wealth of Exxon or anybody else is what's the actual wealth of the economy. And then you have the financial aggregates on top of that, or monetary aggregates. That is the money produced to keep the financial paper in circulation by it being bought and sold in the markets and so on and so forth. Those can skyrocket up to a point, but at a certain point, you reach a shockwave front where that mass of monetary aggregates and that mass eventually also of financial aggregates cannot be supported. Financial aggregates going first, then monetary aggregates collapsing, and the entire economy caves in on itself. Right? Both the real economy, which has been deteriorating for years, but finally the house of cards itself comes down. So, moving on here, and here's just one of these warnings. This is the Bank of International Settlements warning of another Lehman Brothers. This is this year. This is what we have to return to. Promethean, fire, different kind of fire. Not financials, insurance, real estate, but fire. Promethean fire. This is what Trump can grasp. We have to grasp again. That is the creative capacities of mankind, which China's unleashing. We have to unleash here. And we have to do it in terms of the real physical economy. This is just GDP on the vertical here on the left, going up. On the right is increased energy consumption per capita. The countries with the highest GDP are out there on the far right, upper right, as the countries that have high energy consumption. You don't have any countries with low energy consumption that are way out there. Right? There's one way of putting it. Because you have to have investment into an expanded energy base and increasing energy flux density to have a modern economy. And we don't have that with windmills and solar power and gas backup and natural gas backup and so on and so forth. That's not going to give us the reliable energy that we're going to need to reindustrialize. Now, President Trump right now is talking about different things in terms of rebuilding infrastructure. This is in the lead up to the State of the Union on January 30th. On the one hand, he's now stating, contrary to his chief economic advisor, that PPPs, public-private partnerships, aren't going to work to build large-scale infrastructure in the United States. He understands this, right? And he knows that this is what we've got to do. We've got to launch some kind of major recovery program here in the United States in terms of manufacturing, industry, and modernizing and expanding agriculture as well. On the other hand, Cohn, his chief economic advisor, the day after he said this at the economic summit last weekend, Cohn came out the next day and said, "Oh, PPPs, that's the way forward. That's what we're looking at for an infrastructure program for the United States." So this is part of the debate going on. This is the American Society for Civil Engineers report card. I'll just pass over that. But the D plus is their report card overall for the United States in terms of where we stand in the world. D is in dog. Yes, okay, thank you. Thank you. All right. So over here we can come back. That's the Three Gorges Dam, by the way, China. That's their new high-speed rail train, rejuvenation. Fuji. That's what it means, rejuvenation. It's high-speed, electric. And maglev. They have launched maglev now. They now have, just the other day, they're now using low and medium speed maglev trains in several cities now, including Beijing. So they're beginning to bring them online. Okay, the first step, Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall was the legislation passed in 1933 by the Congress. Glass-Steagall being the sponsor. President Roosevelt's key legislation to the face of the banking crisis, and it put up a firewall between speculation and commercial banking. We're going to end speculation, which is what banks have been engaged in. That's got to be stopped. That's going to be stopped. Second step is a national bank. We have to create a functioning bank. Okay, here's an immediate situation. Cost of rebuilding in Texas from Hurricane Harvey. You build the Ike Dike, you build new reservoirs, not just on the creek, but on all of the rivers, Sabine on across. What's it going to cost to actually build a system for flood mitigation and hurricane mitigation? It's going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars, right? Puerto Rico, hundreds of billions of dollars. Florida, $100 billion, maybe more. Right? That's okay. So where's this going to come from? New York City, we just had the Hackensack Bridge, right across the Hackensack River, just got stuck the other day. That's where Amtrak comes down, from the Northeast, comes down through there. Freight comes down through there. It got stuck because it's so old. It gets stuck periodically, and they have to go out there with a sledgehammer and beat the damn thing to get the thing to come down again. I mean, that's how bad it is. You can correct me if I'm no. I'm speaking. Okay, all right. We have a friend here from New Jersey. Oh, it's a swinging bridge, not up, but swing. Swings back and forth. Art Murphy's here, so he's from New Jersey, so he's our resident expert for home. Okay. Now the government doesn't have the money. We're talking about budget cuts, right? We're talking about the government can't go into more debt. We've been spending all this money on all these wars, trillions of dollars gone into wars and so on and so forth. Do we tax people more? You can tax the rich, but you've got to create here hundreds of times more in terms of credit than was created by Roosevelt using the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, TV and so forth. We have to create hundreds of times more credit to actually carry out a rebuilding of the United States from the dismal conditions it's in today. What's the mechanism? A national bank, as Hamilton had initiated it in the founding days of the United States after putting together the U.S. Constitution. The national bank that was created with the support of Congress. Okay. The question was the difference between a national bank and the Federal Reserve. All right. You could actually transform the Federal Reserve as essentially into a national bank if you wanted to. Not that they would want to themselves, but you can nationalize the Federal Reserve and turn that into a national bank. You could. I mean, that's one thing. But the Federal Reserve only lends money. Banks have to deposit a certain amount of money with the Fed, right? In exchange, they get currency from the Fed. Okay, the Fed, though, only gives out money to ensure the liquidity of the bank. It does not lend into the economy. Congress doesn't tell the Fed, okay, we want $6 trillion generated, over the next 5 years, for these areas of economic priority. Right? It only provides liquidity into the existing banks that are member banks of the Federal Reserve. Okay, and of course it's privately owned. Okay, a national bank, as was created in the founding of the United States, the national bank opened its doors, the backing of the United States, which was barely solvent at the time, but nonetheless, it provided some liquidity through kind of a game that was played. Some money into the bank. They opened their doors and they said, okay, bring us all your bad debt. Bring us all the debt. You've got debt from the American Revolutionary War. You've got debt, IOUs, from the troops that came through. And they took your hogs. You've got this paper, including from the states, the 13 colonies, each including their own papers. Bring it here. Bring it here. Invest it. Invest that paper into this bank, and we will give you our national banknote. We will give you our paper in exchange, and we will guarantee a 4 or 5% interest return on this paper because it's being backed by a tax that we put on imported booze coming into the United States and some other things. That was, and so people did that. They brought their paper, they put it into the bank, they got banknotes from this, what we'll call banknotes for the purposes of this discussion, and those notes then circulated as currency throughout the 13 colonies. Right? Now the bank now had a pool of investment into it, and of course others could have put savings. The U.S. government put its tax revenues there while it wasn't being used, while it wasn't being immediately spent. And out of that pool, the bank extended credits for projects, economic development projects, roads, private companies. They did private business deals, with companies for different projects as well. Merchants, all kinds of things. And specifically directed to productive activity. Explicitly, the concept was in writing. That the purposes of these investments, of these credits being lent and so forth, was to increase the productivity and well-being of the nation, for future generations, right?
This national bank would like to do.
I don't want to get into the Bank of North Dakota. Texas has, Texas has several of its own infrastructure. There's SWIFT. It's a water project. There's 3 or 4 of them, different kinds of them. But they sell bonds, and then they raise money, and then they finance. They finance the building of water projects in the state. But they have to pay those borrowings back, right? It doesn't operate. It cannot operate. SWIFT or these other localized banks cannot issue tens of trillions of dollars worth of credit on the scale that's needed to rebuild the United States economy, and it couldn't coordinate it either because But anyway, the point is, the Bank of North Dakota is not just a difference of size, it's a qualitative distinction. Let me just leave it at that as a short answer for right now. Right? But a national bank, and this is just a summary in terms of national credit, that you put the money into the bank, capital. For example, this is a very serious discussion going on. We're injecting this into the debate in Washington, around the country, all the places where we're organized. China, also Japan. China, they're open to investing hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars of their surplus, their their bounty from the trade surplus they've had with the United States, to invest it back into the United States. A lot of it right now is held in U.S. government bonds, which gets virtually no interest, right, at current level. The Fed's lending to keep the banks alive. The interest rates are now virtually zero, right? So they have stated, for example, the Chinese Investment Corporation has stated a year ago, that they would like to instead put that money into infrastructure, all right? So a national bank, or you could call it an infrastructure bank or a credit institution, could take not only in the lending or the paper, the debt, its own debt, the debt of the government. Let's back up. All kinds of people hold U.S. Treasury, okay? Pension funds, so on and so forth. All of that could be invested into a national bank. Just like what was done in Hamilton's time. The U.S. has all of this debt. Well, a significant chunk of that debt could be invested into and help capitalize a bank of the United States, a national bank or infrastructure. Likewise, Japan and China in particular, is open to doing that in terms of investing into a infrastructure bank in the United States. But the United States has to propose it. They're open to the idea. We have to propose it as a serious, concrete option. Right? So a bank capitalized at, say, $1 trillion through this process would lend you, and this is all discussed in more detail in this pamphlet, would lend then, say, $10 trillion for projects to build out an entirely new infrastructure platform in the United States. Of schools, urban sewer systems, water projects on the scale of WAPA could be initiated, nuclear power plants, the funding of an expanded U.S. space program, and so on and so forth. Now, how would that be paid back? Just as this lending was paid back from the First National Bank, as was with Roosevelt's Reconstruction Finance Corporation lending. The projects themselves increased the bounty, increased the creative activity of the populace. You're unleashing Promethean. You're unleashing the creative capacity of every man and woman in the nation, right? And doing likewise for the children, the future of the nation. That's what you're doing. And so the multiple created in this process more than covers through tax revenues and otherwise, revenues back into the bank, back into the country, to allow the loans to be paid back directly to the bank, but the country as a whole prospers, and the federal revenues increase as well. Yes. Not a lot of difference. China, the question is about China. What is China doing? The law is exactly this method. First of all, there's an intention. Right? The hang-up is everybody, the common wisdom today, the axiom that has to be broken is just leave the markets alone. Let people just buy what they want, sell what they want. It'll all work out. Yeah. Opioid addiction, gambling. How much money did people invest into the lottery? In the attempt to win this last $450 million. Anyway, this is not how you run or ever have been able to organize an economy. There has to be an intention on part of the country itself. Okay, where are we going to invest? So China has an indicative economy. It has a directed economy. The decisions are made, the state council, but it's the think tanks, the companies, these large major 22 major companies, these government-owned companies, and on into the private sector. Actually, more of the Chinese economy today is private than it is public. But anyway, the point is that there's an overall dialogue process, discussion process, and these intentions are made concrete. We will lift all people out of poverty by 2020. Okay, now how will we do that? Okay, well, you figure that out. We will build out a national high-speed rail system that will reach every city in the country, by 2025. Okay, figure out how to get it organized to do it. How did we fight World War II? We organized the nation to get it done. Plants were converted, new factories were built. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation built entire factories itself and then handed them over to corporations for basically $1 and said, okay, now start producing. When they couldn't get the companies to build the plants themselves, they built them and then put them into action, right? I mean, you get things done, right? When you have an intention, and the intention doesn't have to be war, the intention can be the building out of a future for your nation, right? And for mankind.
The factories where they were turning out the East Coast War, you couldn't see from the one wall to the other wall, a mile and a half or 2 miles. Now, does those buildings exist before World War II started, or was that
both. They've converted auto plants and so forth. And I'm not trying to pretend to be the expert on all the details, but entirely new plants were built as well. Aluminum had started out. Aluminum was a very expensive thing, to utilize. I mean, the top of the Washington Monument was made out of aluminum because it was the most valued mineral in the world at that time. But the course of building out the dams, the Columbia dams, Grand Coulee, and so on and so forth, developing the waterworks, we began to produce aluminum, which doesn't exist naturally, and we created an entire aircraft industry, for the war effort. And aluminum became, something used in tin can, right? A common, ordinary product. But those plants, those dams, those were built out in the course of the late 1930s, second half of the 1930s and the 1940s. And it's only under Truman that all that was dismantled. Roosevelt's intention was to take that capacity then and turn it to production to build the developing countries, the new nations that were going to be freed from colonialism in the aftermath of World War II, including Indochina, including Vietnam, that we had agreed would be freed. Truman came in, and the London, Harriman, East Coast establishment crowd said no, and we give it back to the French, and from the French, we got it, and the Vietnam War and the disaster. On the other hand, Roosevelt's intention was to use this incredible arsenal of democracy and unleash it to develop the world. This is exactly what China is doing today, coming back to your question. So China has through its banks, its central bank, but it has a set of 3 policy banks, has 4 or 5, depending on how you count them. The big 4 or the big 5 banks, under that, the big commercial banks, go on down, operate in terms of a coordinated effort with an indicative plan, which was outlined at this recent 19th Party Congress, most recently, a month or 2 ago. So this is what can be done with national credit, as China has done it in their form. It's not the same as we would do it, but in their form. And the transformation, of course, of fire is a key component of this. Moving for more higher energy flux densities, from wood to coal to petroleum to electrical power and so on and so forth, and the leap to fusion is the 4th of the 4 laws that Lynn is proposing, and LaRouche has emphasized, not just proposed, but required to make a leap to the mixed platform. We've got to build out an entirely new revolution in energy resources around fusion energy. And I'm just concluding here. But, back in the 1970s, as many of you know, plans were made on the development of fusion energy. And this was the proposal in 1976 of different pathways and when fusion energy would be achieved. The actual funding is this line along the bottom. We knew, in the mid-1970s, that we would never get fusion at the levels of funding that has been given since then. And with these different moderate, aggressive, accelerated maximum funding levels, we could get it much sooner. So the point of this is, again, this question of a science driver, of an intention, of fire. Higher forms of fire. So there's no more that can be said, but China's doing this. This is recognized now. France is recognizing it. We've got to get back to our own system and link up with this. And China is quite willing to collaborate with us as it is with other nations. Global land bridge approach, this global Silk Road. So open it up for discussion.
Is that kind of technology global?
Yeah, well, that's a very important point. I mean, for example, China is quite willing to, I don't want to overstate it, but China has certainly indicated, Chinese Investment Corporation is one in particular, that they're willing to invest in the United States in infrastructure. Okay. Obviously, China would like to export their technology here, as they have elsewhere. Now, China leads the world in high-speed rail and bridge building and so on and so forth in terms of these kinds of things, right? Okay, so we can work it out, just like we've worked out deals with China, where we've transferred technology in the course of setting up production. U.S. companies have. In the course of setting up a production in China, they've agreed to transfer technology to Chinese companies that they're in partnership with. So China, over time, ends up, so to speak, owning the technology as well, being able to utilize that technology. We can import, in the process of Chinese investment, technology transfer from China back into the United States in terms of high-end manufacturing and high-speed rail building and so on and so forth. Sure, that can be worked out, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Yes, sir.
Where they need go from their own factories and so on. They're very secret. They only hire their own engineers, their own labor, and when you say that they will share the technology, this is your question. Maybe with a better understanding between China and the United States, maybe they will share. But so far, what I know, they do good, but they do first for themselves, as in Russia, as in Africa, and in other areas. Maybe you should be, joyful about their sharing.
No, you're behind the times. China has very explicitly, and countries they've negotiated with, whether it's Ethiopia or Russia, right? And it's also Japan is now going into Russia in the Far East collaboratively, right? They're going in on the basis of an understanding, right, of technology transfer, of collaboration, and so forth. So this is has very rapidly changed over the course of the last decade and accelerated in the last 5 years. So, you can find videos of the president of Ethiopia, and so forth, Ethiopian engineers, Kenyan engineers, and so forth, talking about the collaboration that they've had, the transfer of knowledge and so forth, schools, so on and so forth, that they've benefited from. So, sure, early on, think of it. China is this country which went through this period of Maoism, what we think of as the Western Maoism. They tried to import the idea of the Soviet Union, of a centralized top down, everything. Okay, we need 5 tons of bolts. Okay, build a bolt that's 5 tons. That's the easiest thing we can do. You try to just order these things from the top and you get a mess down below, right? And they tried to import that model. Well then, so then there was the reform and opening up process again around 1978. And so suddenly there was this process in which private ownership, private companies and so forth going free. And so these private companies grew and developed, and they were spirited and they wanted to go overseas. And China was willing to help other countries. Well, these Chinese companies would go over there to help. And of course, they had these crazy, wild-ass ideas. It was like the Wild West. They wanted to do it their way or the highway, right? And so there was all these friction, in various countries with these various projects originally. But over time, obviously, the problems were recognized, right? And China didn't want to have these problems. This was an embarrassment. And so they cleaned up their act. It's just like U.S. corporations. We had a bad rep, abroad at various points, particularly in developing countries. You got to clean these things up, and that's what's been going on.
What about the high school? That was something that's kind of grown here in the U.S. and it would leapfrog the high-speed train, and we're building it ourselves. One of the issues on the high-speed trains is California's running into. It's like, oh, well, that's my property. I don't want the train running through there. So you're just going to build it right under. Build out a whole network of hyperloops throughout the entire U.S.
Well, we're going to have to build out a whole national platform. Let me just. This is something Mr. LaRouche has emphasized, probably 20 years, at least 10 years. The idea of a platform as opposed to just infrastructure. That is, if you look at what China's doing, it's building out an entirely new infrastructure platform for the whole country. It involves, these power lines that are super conducting and energy efficient. It involves the high-speed rail. It involves these massive waterworks programs. And it's all part and parcel of an overall perspective. It's changing all the time. It's not fixed, but they're building out a platform, and it reaches into the cities and so on and so forth. So, in terms of building out a platform for the United States, high-speed rail is going to be incredibly important in developing the labor force. You're not going to jump to hyperloops without a workforce that can build them. Further, high-speed hyperloops, incredibly costly per mile at this point, right? It's not going to be something that's going to be immediately viable for freight and for moving millions of people. So you're going to have to fold that in, assuming that it's working, assuming that you make it work. It looks good on paper. China has its own hyperloop. They're working on it. You can imagine they're exploring that as well. So, if it's something that works out, you're going to fold that in, right? But it's going to begin with, it's going to move a small number of people and a small amount of freight, high value freight, and high value people that, for whatever reasons, has to go from point A to B very fast. And it's profitable or efficient to do it that way. So there'll be a role. And over time, who knows how it'll be developed. But I don't think there's a contradiction there. Sure, there's a certain leapfrogging that will occur. But then we'll use up what we've already built. China has used up, like solar panels in China. One of the things, China built up a solar panel production capacity. Logistics, supply chain, and so forth, exporting to the world. Well, the rest of the world began to crash after 2008. Solar panels didn't become the market that they thought they were going to become. So China has said, we have this capacity. Let's use it wherever we can. Well, it's not the most efficient source of energy, but they'll use it in the desert, up there in Inner Mongolia. They'll use it wherever they can to get something out of what they already have. They already built it. They've already got a workforce. So utilize it and move on. You know, suck it up and move on. But you don't just trash what you've got. You know, take the example of West Virginia. West Virginia, Obama left West Virginia to rot. Oh, we're not going to use coal. You know, and all these people are unemployed, drug addiction, disaster. Here comes a China company, I can't remember the China Energy, something like that, comes in as part of the negotiations between Xi Jinping and Trump, starting there at Mar-a-Lago. And with Trump's help, the Trump administration's help, they reached a deal, West Virginia, with China Energy for $83.7 billion worth of investment into West Virginia to build manufacturing capacity, chemical manufacturing capacity, right there in West Virginia. Not just to haul out coal, but to take the coal and transform it into chemical products, right? So this is now, the State of the Union was just given, the State of the Union address was just given in West Virginia. It's on online, I'm told, and I look forward to watching it. But they're ecstatic in West Virginia. The head of the Department of Commerce of West Virginia just got on the plane, I guess it was yesterday, going to China, saying publicly, China wants to move on this. We want to get this moving right away. I'm going there so we can, do whatever to expedite these projects. So there's a whole array of projects that they've been defining over the last couple of years, and now they're moving forward on it. So so you don't leave West Virginia behind. You utilize it and move on from there, right? Coal won't play the same role in the future that it has in the past. But China, for example, has very advanced processes for turning coal, into gas, and then using the gas, right, and making plastic. All right, so there's a future for coal. There's a future for West Virginia. Yeah, Marcia. Deputy Consul General of China.
Integrate into the country that they're not.
I'm glad you're bringing this up. Yeah.
Because I want to see that because I'm not just saying this from a theoretical standpoint. Ryan, Steve, and others are involved in dialogue with the Chinese here and across the country, so that we're in a process of
making it happen or trying, working. Yeah. No, people to people. I mean, that's very explicitly part of, as you may have read and seen, Representative from China emphasized that it's not just that the Silk Road is not simply material, not simply rail. It's not simply these things, but it's also, as Macron, what I was reading from Macron, the Silk Road is about people to people interaction, exchange, the trading of ideas, of culture, and so on and so forth. And that's very much at the heart of what China is doing here. Well, we've been focused in the discussion in terms of the countdown to the State of the Union on January 30th and infrastructure and the material side of this. We're really talking about, in a more profound way, a dialogue of cultures on the highest level around the world, creating a new paradigm for mankind, a new platform in terms of infrastructure, a new paradigm for mankind in whole. Yes. Vladimir.
The award, some part of the award is usually a logic. Now, we see more collaboration between China, French, and in some of the European countries, in the U.S. understand the value of the realistic road. What do we anticipate now? Where are we going from? What type of platform? Where are we going from now? What type of platform that we use now to be going forward and implement now? And we can see an acceleration of the implementation of the realistic road. Also, I know that at the end of this year, President Trump was saying that people for like big infrastructure projects, so we have a problem here. So how all that come together, and what we will see in the next coming month, in the implementation of the new system.
Well, I think first and foremost, people have to master, we all have to master what's in this pamphlet, and spread it. Take these ideas and spread them. That there is this new paradigm. There is these prospects for us. That we've been inside this kind of, we're like that horse with blinders on it. Can't see what's actually going on around the world. That's the effect of this media barrage, the pessimism, and so on. That's what is broken by what China's doing and other nations are doing in collaboration, and what the U.S. can join in. For example, Macron was proposing, and this is apropos of the United States, joint project. 770 million Africans are going to be French-speaking within the next 20 years or so. China is committed to the development of African nations. All right, France has a major role to play. Its expertise in nuclear power, science, generally all kinds of areas. Right. So the United States, what we could see happening very rapidly, Panama, the nation of Panama, has joined the new Silk Road. China is building major port capacity there. It's now intent on launching a rail project. And ultimately, the ultimate intent is to build it all the way up into Mexico. So you finally, for the first time, have a rail system, functioning effective transport rail and communications system through all of Central America. Transform it from a drug-ridden hellhole of drug gangs and so forth, which drug legalization has held hostage here in the United States, allow for the rebuilding of these nations. This is the kind of approach that's needed. So you can see the United States joining in these projects, dam building, other infrastructure projects. Texas, we have locomotive capacity. They build locomotives in Fort Worth, right? We have General Electric building electric motors out here towards San Antonio. U.S., we could be exporting manufacturing goods, increasingly high-tech manufacturing goods, out of the United States as this new platform is built up in old South America. In other words, we not only could be building up our own nation, but in the process, we could begin playing a growing role once again, leveraging our development to increase the speed and rapidity of progress in South America and the Caribbean, for example. So that kind of collaboration, but you've got to have a financial mechanism to do it. You've got to clear away the speculative paper. You've got to set in motion a credit institution which you can start this process. And then private banks, commercial banks, otherwise, everybody can get in on it as part of this growing economy and prosper. Keisha. Yeah. Well, no, it'd be good for somebody else. So. Absolutely. Keisha Rogers, running for Congress in the 9th District as an independent. Emotional. Restored.
And the mindset could be, what do you think is going to be the outcome of the forecast? This is what it's right there. I mean,
It's up
the
to us.
onus is on us.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, we'll end it there, I think. That's on a good note. Definitely read this pamphlet. It's an exciting pamphlet. And then we'll go from there. Thank you.